Awesome. Okay, so we didn't have any issues with the homework. If you guys do have any questions as we move forward, please let me know. Is this anybody's first class? Is another question that I have before we get started. Okay, Hannah, Jackie, Megan. Okay, first class. Okay, so I do believe that the first two classes that we had should be up on either divination or the YouTube, on the YouTube site, or I'm not on the YouTube site, on the YouTube channel. Jesus, this Mercury retrograde is really getting me. It should be on the YouTube channel or on divination.com. I'm not sure which one is on, but I do know at some point, if it's not on YouTube, it should be in the very near future. I know Alex and I have been trying to kind of figure out the best way to make sure that everything gets transferred over to her. So hopefully that's been going off without a hitch, and these recordings have been going through. Okay, so let's get started. So I talked about last week, we finished the houses, but we never actually talked about some of the, I guess, more intricate ways of or the more foundational ways of why astrology behaves, how we get some of our rules that we get into when we're talking about why certain planets interact with other planets the way that they do, or how we get certain traits that come from certain signs. We never really talked about that, and so I'm kind of rewinding. So this handout that I have up on the screen right now is from, let me see if I can make it bigger, just so everyone can see it. Okay. Okay, that looks good. But yeah, we had started to talk about that last week, but I promised that we would kind of return to those.
I want to listen to this.
I'm sorry? Did we have a question? Okay, yeah, you guys remember, if you guys can, everyone could mute themselves, just so we don't have any confusion. Okay, so we're going back to the handout that's the planets part 3. That's where you'll find this chart, or not chart, I guess technically, it's just what we'll call the Thema Mundi. And so this will be, I think it's on it's on the 5th page, because it's a 7-page handout. And so it's on the 5th page, so it's the second to last page. But it's so this is the Thema Mundi. So the Thema Mundi is the birth chart of the universe, and it's a foundational part of Hellenistic astrology. Why we don't use this in modern astrology is beyond me, because I think it absolutely makes everything make a whole lot of sense. So I encourage you guys to use some of the reasoning from this diagram in particular, even if you're more of someone that looks at modern astrology, and if that's your jam, that's great. But I would really encourage that the Thema Mundi be put into your practice, only because it solves a lot of questions that you might have about planet interactions or order of the zodiac. So in the Thema Mundi, we have the sun and moon. They're the luminaries. These are the only two, I guess, technically planets that aren't planets in astrology, because they're luminaries that give light. So we have the divine masculine and the divine feminine. So therefore, Cancer and Leo are going to be the first 2 houses of astrology, or of the Thema Mundi, which is the birth chart of the universe. So Cancer is on the ascendant, which is going to be right here. It's not numbered or anything, but we just kind of put the moon and the sun as the 2 main parts of the universe's chart because they're the luminaries. And so when we're talking about why certain signs are opposite of each other, or why we get how we get like sextiles and squares and oppositions as far as aspects in astrology, the Thema Mundi gives a lot of reasoning behind that, as well as it helps out with understanding those kind of like the results that come from aspects. So this will be really important, not just for today, but also when we do get into aspects, which I think if it's not going to be this class, it's going to be the next class. So we have the sun and moon, the moon being the ruler of the ascendant, and the sun, of course, being, I guess, the technical second house. So on each side of the luminaries, you're going to always have a Mercury ruled sign. So on one side of Cancer is Gemini, on the other side of Leo, it's going to be, of course, Virgo. And that's just a rule. So that's where we're looking at a lot. This will come into play a lot more when we do look at aspects, but then you'll always have a Venus ruled sign on either side of Mercury ruled sign. So you'll always have Taurus coming before Gemini, but after Virgo, you'll always have Libra. And then comes the Mars ruled signs after that, as well as the Jupiter ruled signs. And then I think the most, not important, but I think some of the, I'll say important. I probably should have started with this, is that Saturn ruled signs are always going to be opposite the light bringers. So you have the sun and moon, which emit some sort of light. Saturn ruled signs, such as Capricorn and Aquarius, are going to be the signs that represent the opposite of any kind of light. So with Cancer and Leo, we have signs that are associated with some sort of life in general. Cancer is always closely related with like fertility. The sun in particular, like we've already learned about when we were talking about the planets, is associated with life and energy. Saturn as a planet, as we've seen, and I think it had to be like either the last week's or the first class that we did, where we talked about the meanings, all right, some of the associations with the planets. Saturn isn't our favorite. It has a lot of serious, not so fun kind of representations or subjects that come along with it. And so I don't want to say that, in all aspects, Saturn will be negative, but I will say that Saturn, as far as like fertility and bringing life, Saturn is not that. So we have Saturn ruled signs opposed to any kind of life signs. We have a question. Yes, there will be a recording. So I'm already recording this lesson. And so again, as long as like Mercury retrograde doesn't like royally screw us over, everything should go on without a hitch. And the recording of this actual lesson should be forwarded to Alex once I end our meeting today. And so if you have to leave the live for any reason, it's absolutely fine. The recording should be up whenever Alex is able to upload it. So we have I got a little sidetracked. So on one end, we have life, the life bringers, literal life bringers, and light bringers. On the other end, you have Saturn, which is, I guess, more cold, represents death in the Hellenistic sense, or some sort of confinement, isolation, limitation, restriction, where we see expansion on the other end with the moon and the sun. Some sort of growth is happening. Saturn represents the opposite of that. And so we see literally oppositions, the planetary opposition, meaning being mirrored within actual like zodiac signs. So I think I'll better be able to explain this also with the actual planets. So let's take Mercury, for instance. Mercury is a planet of intellect. It's about taking things apart. It's about the little details of things. It's about numbers. It's about calculations. It's about small details. It's about asking questions, talking, communication, all of that, and thinking. It's not going to be a surprise then that Mercury signs will always be opposite of Jupiter signs, such as Gemini and Sagittarius are opposite signs because Jupiter's energy is very different and is going to be the exact opposite of Mercury. Jupiter is going to be more about how you feel. If any of you have been in classes with me, then you'll remember this example that I've used about Mercury and Jupiter. So Jupiter is kind of going to be like the feeling of like Christmas dinner or like Thanksgiving, where you have lots of food, you have alcohol, you have like the party going on. It's just a good time, right? It's the feeling of the good time. It's the expansiveness. It's like just like a whole bunch of benevolence, generosity, maybe. But imagine Mercury is going to be that one cousin or that uncle or whatever that wants to come to the family gathering for the holidays and talk about politics. It wants to talk about religion, all the things you're not supposed to talk about at the at a dinner table or whatever. It wants to talk about because it's thinking about not thinking about like, oh, we're having such a great time. Mercury is more thinking about, well, why do we have this good time? Like, is this all a part of like capitalism or the patriarchy or whatever? And it wants to start that conversation. It wants to create debate. It wants to see different views of things. Where Jupiter is more about like, I just want to have a good time. Let's do like body shots or whatever. And of course, like this is like my own example, and so you can take however you understand what I'm trying to say, like you can modify it to your own ideas, but this is kind of the energy that both embody. And so on one end you have the critic, on the other end you just have the party animal. And of course Jupiter can be very astute as well, um, especially in the sign of Sagittarius, but you see the same thing kind of happening in Mercury and Pisces because of the same kind of interactions that's happening because of the planet that rules the zodiac signs. Um, we'll move on from Mercury and Jupiter. Does anybody have any questions about the dynamic between Mercury and Jupiter before we move on to Venus and Mars? Okay, so with Venus, we have Venus being the planet that represents relationships, harmony, coming together, relationships, sex, uh, things that taste good, smell good, feel good, pleasure, money as well. It's all about like the things that comfort you in some way, shape, or form, whether it be through people or your senses, or just having the resources that you need. Venus is also about self-esteem as well as like self-respect. Mars is going to be about cutting things off or aggression, um, which is obviously the opposite of what Venus is trying to do. Where Venus is trying to bring things together, Mars is all about cutting things apart. It's literally about severing things apart. And so we can see the difference between those two. Let's move on to, actually, no, we've covered everything. So um, I did want to just talk about these oppositions, not only to highlight why like Pisces and Virgo are opposite signs or why um, Cancer and Capricorn are going to be opposite signs, but this will also, like I said, come into play a lot more when we're talking about creating your own interpretations of a birth chart and understanding how we could get um, not like that stereotypical interpretation of, say, like Aquarius, because you're thinking not so much from the stereotypical meaning of Aquarius, but you're more thinking from what does Saturn represent, um, which can take you into a world of different interpretations as well. It opens things up quite a bit. So I think this is really a great way to look at the signs, not just from what you always put out there about them, but what planet is actually ruling over them. As well as like the other reasons I said that I wanted to talk about the Thema Mundi as well. Because I won't get into it now, but the Thema Mundi also is going to be connected to the Chaldean order, which is basically just talking about how fast all the planets are traveling, which does come into importance more so from um, understanding transits, or even like if you get into horary astrology where you're asking questions, then the Chaldean order becomes, I think, like a bit more important. For this class, I don't think it's super important that you understand the Chaldean order. I mean, you can if you want to, but it's not something that um, I think is super important for this class. But okay, so I just wanted to jump back to this, but we are going to jump into the, let's see, we're going to jump into, we already did houses. We're going to jump right into the zodiac signs. Before we get into that, everybody, if you don't mind, if you could put your big three into the chat. I'll be picking out some examples later in class, and we'll pull up some charts because we're getting actually near the end of this course in general. So I did want to start doing some chart practice, and we can start with this class in particular. So yeah, if you don't mind, and if you don't mind sharing, if you could put your big three, your sun, moon, and rising into the chat, and I'll look at that later. So we're going to be, it's going to be, we're going to be jumping to the handout that starts with house rulerships and house systems. And then we'll be getting into the actual zodiac signs. So with house systems, I think I talked about this last week, but just in case I didn't. So house systems, there are two, I guess, more popular house systems, more than others. They're the ones that you'll see mostly on like birth chart calculating websites, which is Placidus, and then there's whole sign. Whole sign is usually more popular with Hellenistic astrologers, and then Placidus is usually going to be more popular with modern astrologers. Honestly, I use both. When I was taking clients, I used both, and I think both create really interesting and accurate interpretations of a person's chart and getting a good understanding of how transits are playing out. It really just depends on your understanding. I'd say, like, if you are just starting out with astrology, Placidus probably would overcomplicate things a bit. But I think that's totally up to you to judge. The whole sign system, and of course, I'm explaining why. So the whole sign system will do one house or one zodiac sign per house. So, like, say you're a Virgo rising. Virgo is your whole first house. So therefore, your whole second house is going to be Libra, and then your whole third house is going to be Scorpio, and so on and so on. However, with Placidus, you can have technically up to three signs in one house. So it kind of meshes everything together where whole sign, or the whole sign housing system is just a bit more neat. So therefore, I think it's a bit easier to read only because you're only dealing with one energy at a time per house. So it just, like, I think organizes things a bit better. But if you do well with chaos, the Placidus house system might be absolutely fine for you to start out with. Different strokes for different folks. I just would say to just take your time with reading the Placidus house system, um, since you are blending energies into one area of life. Okay, so let's see. So that is the house systems. So we didn't talk about house rulerships, I don't think, last time. So basically, all house rulers are or actually, we kind of touched on this. So you can't really see this. Let me zoom this in. So um, let's say for exercise 2.1, that's on this handout, for instance, we have somebody that's a Capricorn rising. And this is the whole sign house system, by the way. We would say that because Capricorn is the ascendant, and therefore the ascendant is like the doorway to the first house. It's where the first house starts. And then because Saturn rules Capricorn, therefore Saturn rules the first house. Because it's the rising sign, therefore Saturn technically rules the whole chart. But and that's why it's called the chart ruler. But we should mostly say that Saturn is going to be the ruler of the first house. We are looking at the whole chart through the lens of Saturn because it's that important. Before modern astrology was a thing, when people asked you, what is your sign? They weren't asking for your sun sign, they were asking for your ascendant sign. And so the first house, I think, I've talked about this, is extremely important for that reason, is because you're looking at the entire chart through the lens of whatever is in that first house. So there can be lots of planets in your first house, but we're really looking at what is the planetary ruler of your ascendant sign. That is the big thing. Wherever that is also going to be important. So, like for this example, Saturn, the chart ruler, is not in Capricorn. It's all the way over here in Taurus in the fifth house. So the person themselves is going to be very Saturn in the fifth house oriented. What that means, we won't get into it right now, but you would basically interpret this placement and then apply it to their identity. Um, so we would say Saturn rules the first house, but then that begs the question, well, what planets rule the other houses? So we would go with that same kind of logic. So the second house is Aquarius. So if you're going the modern astrology route, then you could say that Uranus rules over the second house. If you want to go with how we're going to be using the planets in this course, then you would just say Saturn also rules the second house. So technically for this chart, we would say Saturn rules the first and the second house. Um, and then Pisces is going to be the third. Uh, and so therefore we say that Jupiter rules over the third house, or if the modern astrology route, you'd say Neptune rules the third. For the fourth house, it's Aries. And so we would say that Mars rules over the fourth house because Mars is the ruler of Aries. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. I'm going to assume that unless we get any kind of message or anything, that everything's kind of just trucking along with everybody else. So we do have some definitions that we want to cover. So we've covered most of them, but I do want to talk about a house cusp as well, because those come into play when we are talking about the Placidus house system. It's just the point where a certain house begins. So we kind of talked about this when I was talking about like the gateway to the first house is called the ascendant. That's the house cusp. It's just where a house starts. So even in like the Placidus house system, if the house starts, say like the first house has Libra and Scorpio, technically inside of it. But the first house cusp is in Libra, then it doesn't matter that Scorpio is also in the first house. Libra is going to be the ascendant because that's where the first house starts. Um, okay, so we just have a bit of an exercise that we're going to go through just to make sure everybody understands. So I've already done technically, I guess, questions 1 through 4, but you can type it into the chat. What would, for this actual chart right here, let me make sure I blow it up so everybody can see it. What would be the ruler of the 5th house? What planet would be the ruler of the 5th house? Because let's see. Absolutely, yeah. No, Venus, thank you, honey. Venus would be the ruler of the 5th because Taurus is the 5th house. And so therefore Venus rules Taurus. So Venus is therefore the ruler of the 5th in this chart in particular. What would be the ruler of the 6th house? So Gemini is going to be the 6th house. So what planet rules over Gemini? Yep, Mercury. Very good. Thank you. So then for the 7th house, we would have Cancer. And so we'd have for Cancer, it would be the moon, would be the ruler of the 7th. Does anybody want to take a shot at the 8th house ruler? Mm. AJ, what planet is that? Mm, mm, mm. Okay, so for the 8th house, it's ruled by Leo. So the sun is the ruler of Leo, so therefore is the ruler of the 8th house. What about for the 9th house, which is going to be Virgo? What planet rules over Virgo and therefore rules over the 9th? Okay, so it would be Mercury, would be the ruler of the 9th. And then um, yeah, no, it's okay, honey. I want everybody, if everyone, just so that we don't have like just one person answering all the questions. Honey, thank you for bringing that up. Um, yes, just so that we don't have like one person answering all the questions, like just take your best guess, guys. They're like, we're all here to learn. And so if you don't know the right answer, it's absolutely fine. I had a teacher once that was like, if you're going to be wrong with confidence. I also respect that. And so, yeah, just say what you think. Go with like your first mind, because usually the first mind is right. Um, and also you can totally look at all of the handouts that you already have at your disposal to answer these questions. It's not cheating or anything like that. So we said Mercury is the ruler of the ninth, which means that going on to the 10th house, that Libra is going to be the 10th house. And so let's just start out with what planet rules over Libra. Does anybody remember, or can anybody find that in the handout? For the answer, it would be, I think the easiest way to find it would be with the planets handouts. So planets part 1, 2, and 3 should cover this. I want to say that technically this should be like, I think on planets part 2, maybe. Jackie, yes. I hope I'm saying that right. Jackie, yes, thank you. It is Venus. So Venus is going to be the ruler of the 10th house for this chart in particular. Um, and then let's go to the 11th house. So the 11th house is going to be Scorpio. There, I guess, are technically two answers for this, depending on what view you're taking. I do want to remind you that for like, as far as like I will be talking about this course, that I'm just going with the traditional planets. I'm not really talking about the outer planets, but if you want to say an outer planet, that's also fine. Um, but when it gets to like actually reading charts, we won't be talking about the outer planets much. But for right now, it's fine to talk about um, the outer planets. Hopefully that didn't like overcomplicate things. Hannah, thank you. Yes, it would be Pluto. So Pluto would be the modern ruler of the 11th house, which would make Mars the traditional ruler of the 11th house. So in like interpreting or like trying to kind of understand the mood of the 11th house, or just kind of like the energy that's coming along with the person's 11th house and the things that have to do with that house, you would make it like a very Plutonian kind of Mars like energy. And I guess like this would be as good a time as any to kind of talk about how would that kind of play out, just kind of as a taste before we actually get to chart practice today. So um, when we're talking about like having a Pluto energy being being like representing as the 11th house, so we would dissect things first before you try and put anything together. So we would just say, okay, what is the 11th house talking about? So the 11th house is going to be the house where we find friendship, allyship. It's going to be where we find like just kind of uh, like our hopes, dreams, wishes, our goals. You can also find like the money that you bring in from your job there. Some people would argue that this is where fame comes in, but you can also think about kind of like the essence of, I don't want to like overcomplicate things, because I think I said in like the first um, lesson to not do this, but I'm going to say to do this if your mind works this way, and if you can keep everything straight. You can say, okay, if you're ever struggling with like, okay, what does the 11th house have to do with? You can always think about, what does Aquarius have to do with? Or what are some Aquarius like things? Just remember that the 11th house and Aquarius are not the same thing. Um, and so you need to be really selective with what you associate with the 11th house and what is associated with Aquarius, because there are some very separate things that don't cross over. As long as you can keep that line between the two straight, you can do whatever. But just remember that Aquarius and the 11th house are not the same thing. But you can have some similar themes running between the two. So something I think about with Aquarius a lot is community, but it's like a community at a distance because it's Saturn ruled, right? So the 11th house has to do with, and also Aquarius is like, it's an air sign. And so it can be a bit more cerebral, but it's about detachment, but it's about socialization as well. So we get social media when we're talking about Aquarius energy. And so the 11th house, it can have a lot to do with what's happening online with like friendships that are a bit more distant, like social media, like coming together with people on social media or things like that. Mostly it's like friendships, or just like coming together with people to work. Um, like we were talking about, like with allyship. But it's like it's thinking a lot about the future. Um, so putting a Mars like slant on those things, such as social media or just a social circle, or that what's best for everybody kind of mentality, which is very Aquarius, because Aquarius is going to be thinking about the group rather than just the singular person. Um, Putting that in an 11th house kind of lens, Mars is going to be like, okay, but what's best for me though? Um, or we could even put it from like a Pluto standpoint, which is like, okay, I want to go to extremes. I want to transform this thing. Um, so we could say that maybe in the realm of like, let's say friendships, that someone with a Pluto like 11th house is going to say that I love my friends. Like I like am borderline obsessed with my friends. Like or you could say like that they're just very loyal to their friends. It could also say that they constantly transform their friend group often, which could have a whole lot of different meanings. It can say that, they're constantly just going in and out of different circles. Most of the time, and I will say that what I've seen from Capricorn rising in particular, especially if they do have Pluto in the 11th, is usually because it's a Mars and Pluto like energy, it's usually not the friendliest kind of energy. And so it's usually not like, oh, I'm just like being a chameleon through different circles. It's like I have a lot of like really strong bonds with people that can kind of crash and burn. Not often, but like, you can be like friends with someone and you're really loyal to that person or whatever, and your friendship is solid for a time. However, when that friendship dissolves, it's usually not pleasant and there's a lot of falling out and therefore create some sort of transformation or crisis that's happening in the friend group. And so therefore you create a new friend group later. So it's the crisis that gives way to some sort of rebirth of a friendship or a friend group or whatever. um, that is kind of, I think, and I know I just like said a whole lot about how to interpret that, because literally there are hundreds of ways you could also apply that because people are complex. Hence, our birth charts are complex, which makes us complex. And so that's not the only way you could, put a or Pluto slant on the 11th house. It could also be somebody that's just very focused on meeting new people. It could be very opportunistic as well. It can be like somebody that's saying like, oh, I don't want to just have friends. I want to have friends in high places because I want to be in a high place. That is also a very Mars like 11th house. Um, the and so that's just kind of like what we're looking into once we do get into just taking on a full chart. But I thought it was a good idea to kind of um, look into how these house rulers come into play, because we're talking about them, yes, but when it actually comes to actually using them, I think it was just a really good time to talk about how would you use them to interpret a certain part of someone's life. Um, okay, so the last house that we have is going to be the 12th house, which is ruled by Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is ruled by what planet? If anybody could let me know, and then we can move on. to the next part of this handout. Yep, absolutely.
Mars?
Yeah, not Mars, but it's Jupiter. But I do appreciate the participation. Thank you. Um, and so we're going to have Jupiter being the ruler of the 12th. And it's actually really nice because in the actual chart, we do actually have Jupiter in the 12th. So if we were interpreting this, it would be nice because Jupiter is already where it rules. Like it's already in a house that it naturally rules in this chart. All right, so let's move on. So we've done all of this. So we're doing the exercise again, but we're doing it with the Placidus system. So this is what I'm talking about. Let me zoom because I feel like this is really zoomed in. And we don't need it for that much for this one because this one's a bit bigger. So we had everything nice and neat in the first chart because it was the whole sign system. Do your best to also just kind of like erase all of this. Don't pay attention to all the lines. We haven't gotten to that yet. We're just really looking at all the planets on the outside of the circle. I do like where this chart came from. So this chart came from AstroTheme. And this chart up here came from AstroDNist or astro.com. I do prefer AstroTheme because the glyphs are bigger and I'm blind. So, but if you have great eyesight and you don't mind the tiny little lines, astro.com can be your thing. But also astro.com has a much bigger housing system and like just kind of chart selection than AstroTheme does. It's really based on your preference. If you know what you're doing, you could use AstroTheme for a lot of things. But astro.com, I think, is just I think it's just more popular because of its wide selection of things that you can do on that website. But Placidus. So where we had everything nice and cut and dry with the chart above, things get a bit more blended with the Placidus system. So we have this person, the first house cusp is at 20 degrees. I want to say this is Demi Lovato's chart. I want to say it is. It is. And so we have their ascendant or their first house cusp starting at 20 degrees of Leo. The degree is really important because it's talking about, okay, this is where the doorway to the first house starts. Whereas in whole sign, like the whole sign of Leo would have been the first house. Wherever Leo started, that's where the first house started. In Placidus, it's not that. It's not the same. And so we would have 20 degrees of Leo being where the first house starts. And then it's going to go 30 degrees from that. It's going to be where the second house starts. So, or sorry, not for the not like 30 degrees like within the same sign, but you guys get what I'm saying. Like, so 30 degrees after that is going to be where we find the second house, and so on and so on. There are also different housing systems that we're not talking about where that's not the case as well, where all the houses are different sizes or have differing differing sizes. So 20 degrees of Leo is where the rising sign starts and where the first house starts, but then we don't get to the second house, which is this little arrow right here, until like I think like I'm just guesstimating here, but that's probably like 13 degrees of Virgo-ish. I'm probably doing the math wrong, but that doesn't start until then. And so therefore parts of Leo and therefore also parts of Virgo are the first house. So when you're talking about how do I find the actual ruler of the first house, there is only one, even though you would be blending two different energies. So for the first house, the sun would be the first house's ruler, even though Virgo is there in the first house. Virgo is, or the Mercury would be the ruler of the second house, because the second house starts in Virgo as well. And so wherever this, like, these little arrows are basically pointing to is the zodiac sign that you're going to be focusing on, and therefore whatever planet rules over that zodiac sign that that arrow is pointing into is the ruler of that house. So for what you're saying, for the second house, you'd have Mercury ruling over the second, and therefore the next arrow for the third house is going to be pointing at Libra, which is going to be Venus is going to be the ruler of the third. And then next we have this really big, bold arrow for the fourth house, since it's one of the cardinal houses. That's pointing at Scorpio. So we would just say Mars is going to be the ruler of the fourth. And then for the fifth, it would be Jupiter, because this next arrow is pointing at Sagittarius. Does anybody want to take a whack at what the sixth house would be? The arrow for the sixth house is going to be right here, pointing at Capricorn. Does anybody want to take a whack at what the sixth house would be ruled by? Honestly, this would probably not be like, so if while we're waiting for somebody to answer, I'm just going to keep talking. So this wouldn't be like my favorite placement, because the sixth house is about your health. So having Capricorn in the sixth probably wouldn't be the funnest time, honestly. And once somebody answers about why it wouldn't be a fun time, we can talk about why that would be. Yep, absolutely. Yes, yes. JC and Hannah, thank you. That's absolutely correct. Saturn would be the ruler of the sixth. So you don't want to have really Saturn, the planet of restriction, ruling over your house of health. Because it's probably not the most fun, because you're probably going to have issues with health in particular, or you're going to have to be very like militant about managing health, or there's going to need to be a lot of work like to maintain health, or just like maintaining very healthy like habits, and a lot of discipline needs to be put in. Either way, it's a whole lot of work where we're talking about the health is concerned. Now, there is a positive way that you could see all of these placements as well, or all of these rulerships as well. Just like how we could see the negative of Saturn being the ruler of the sixth house, we can also see a lot of positives. The sixth house is all about your day-to-day life and what needs to get done, like kind of like mundane life. Saturn is very much about structure. And so having Saturn be ruling a house that's about structure and what you need to get done on a day-to-day basis, it says that you're probably very efficient, you're structured, you probably have all the to-do lists, you're somebody that can be very organized. And I suppose with the right aspects, you could be somebody that could possibly be a good leader. Either way, you get things done. The flip side of that is that you could put quite a bit of pressure on yourself, which would refer us back to probably like the stressful part of like the health aspect. But you could see how we could view different aspects of Saturn being the ruler of the sixth, and how it could be a great thing, but it could also be a really hard placement, or just like a really hard rulership for that house in general. Saturn usually doesn't rule over fun things. The sixth house is not a fun place. Having those two together honestly doesn't sound like a good time to me, but I don't have Saturn ruling over my sixth house, so what do I know? so let's move on to the seventh house. So the seventh house's arrow is going to be this big bold one right here pointing at Aquarius. like we used to kind of said before, I'll go ahead and just say this one. So it's going to be Saturn is going to be the ruler, the modern, or not modern ruler, the traditional ruler of um, Aquarius. And so therefore it's going to be the ruler of the seventh house as well. If you wanted to go with the modern astrology route, Uranus would be the ruler of the seventh. Um, which honestly, like, kind of sounds like a whole lot of chaos to me, like having Uranus be the ruler of your seventh when it's about partnerships. But Saturn could also be the ruler of your seventh, um, which also has its positives and negatives as well when you're talking about relationships with other people, one-on-one relationships with other people. They could say that one, you have a whole lot of people come in and out of your life sporadically, but it could also say that partnerships with other people, you have lots of partnerships with people like from different walks of life. A lot of like quirky kind of people are going to be in your life, or that you gravitate towards those people, or those kinds of people gravitate towards you. Big thinkers are going to be maybe somebody that you gravitate towards more, someone that's very focused on the future or building something for the future, is all coming from not necessarily Aquarius in the seventh, but it's coming from the fact that Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius and therefore rules over your seventh house. Um, and then we can get into like details by saying, okay, yeah, Aquarius is my seventh. You can get into all kinds of colorful things by looking at that, but we're looking at the overall characteristic of the seventh house from um, the planetary ruler of that house from that perspective. So the eighth would be ruled by Jupiter. Um, and then because it's Pisces, so that arrow is right here. Um, the ninth is going to be ruled by Mars because that arrow is right here in Aries, which puts Taurus as the 10th, which means that Venus is going to rule over the 10th, which honestly I'm a little jealous of, because that just screams you're just kind of like a money making machine. Which I mean, considering whose chart this is, that makes a lot of sense. But it also has its negatives as well. Um, so Venus rules over the 10th, and then we have Gemini as the 11th. So that means Mercury rules over the 11th in this chart, which puts Cancer in the 12th, which means the moon rules over the 12th in this chart in particular. So I just kind of like went through this this exercise for you, but do you guys have any questions about the Placidus house system and how I got these rulerships? So I know I kind of like gypped you out of answering the questions yourself, but I figured you guys wouldn't mind. But I want to ask, did you have any questions before we move on to the next thing? Okay, so we're going to move on to the actual zodiac signs. Um, so there are a lot of, I want to say, like, before we get started on this, there are a lot of different ways to view the zodiac signs. I'm just going to give you a couple ways to come up with like archetype, like remembering archetypes to think of when you're considering traits that will probably come up with certain signs. We don't want to, I don't want you guys to just think like Aries, oh, I know an Aries person, so therefore all Aries people exhibit this. I don't want you to think like that. I want you to think of Aries as more as an energy, not as a person, or not as like the psychology that comes behind it, because Aries is not that. Aries is just an energy and it has representatives. Um, and the same is said for all the other 11 zodiac signs. They're just energies and they represent themselves within us. But they're archetypes. because when we do get into talking about transits, it becomes very different, or not very different, but we have to look at the archetypes in more of an archetypal kind of way, not through a psychological perspective. Um, so we have Aries, the ram. It's going to be a masculine um, sign, which means it's more active. It's going to be a bit more in your face, out there kind of sign, more literal, like we talked about in the first lesson. Um, the element is fire, mode is cardinal, and the planet that rules over it's going to be Mars. You are pulling all of the traits from these things, not necessarily from the ram part. I mean, I guess you technically could if you are well versed in knowing what rams do, I suppose. I am not. I just know that they bump heads. I think. I don't know if that's the ram or if that's like the goat. I know, like, whenever I think of like the ram, I think of like two rams bumping heads against each other. But I could be wrong. That might just be goats. But you're pulling traits from masculine, fire, cardinal, and Mars. And that's how you get Aries. You put them all together. Um, and I can say that you'll get a good amount of traits just from that. But I also want to give you some other options. Um, of, I guess, like real life ways to think of it as well. So I put like down here, you could think of like Xena, warrior princess, very Aries like character, right? A little bit sexual, but also complete badass. Very much like in, very conflict oriented kind of um, character. Literally, she has a bunch of like weapons that cut things that are used for combat, aggression. Even the character's like personality is very Mars like, or you could literally go for, I also don't know if everybody's seen Xena Warrior Princess. If you haven't, you are missing out because I love that show. But you'll have to just take my word for it. Great show. It's a great, I think, representation of what Aries energy is like. A lot of conflict, but it's also a lot of like just wanting to explore what is to be seen, a lot of pioneering that comes along with that energy, as well as like just a lot of energy in general that comes up with that, as well as conflict. But also we could think of the actual god Aries, not just in that show, because the god Aries does come up in that show in particular. But think of, like, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, think of Aries or Mars, the god in mythology. Um, we have a question. What is the mode? The mode for Aries is going to be cardinal. So let's also look at this, because we're talking about tropical astrology. We can't talk about tropical astrology without also talking about what time of year Aries season shows up in. So Aries season comes at a time where everything is waking up. Um, we'll have to see if maybe I can also draw a diagram through like paint or something. I don't know, that might be doing too much. There should be a whiteboard on here. Maybe I'll have to draw it on the whiteboard. But basically, we're talking about a time of the year where the light of spring is making its great emergence from the dark of winter. So think about the amount of energy that takes to go from complete darkness to light. It's literally moving something forward. We're going from a very Saturn, I guess, like time, because Saturn embodies more dark, cold months. But also, if everybody could make sure that they're muted. But with Aries, we're looking at a time where we're seeing things grow or burst into being, or some new beginning coming up. Um, If everybody could mute themselves, I'm not sure who I'm hearing. Thank you. Okay. So let me actually, because I think this might be better represented if I took us to the whiteboard for a second. Is there a way to do the whiteboard from here? Oh, I can annotate. Can I annotate on the actual? I can draw. Perfect. We're just gonna draw straight on the thing. Okay, so bear with me. I've never done this before, so hopefully this works out. Okay, so we're looking at the beginning of the year, starting right here. Oh, it works. Perfect. So we're starting right here. Aries season is going to be right here, where there's an uptick of light, life, beginnings, whatever. We're looking at the zodiac as like an oscillation of light and therefore like the seasons. Light and dark are going to be the main thing that we're talking about when we're looking at how therefore like the seasons and therefore how certain things will show up in the interpretation of the actual zodiac sign. So if Aries is coming at a time where there is an uptick of light, but there's still a very much could everybody make sure they're muted? Can everyone make sure they're muted, please? Thank you. Okay, so we're looking at just like this, the beginning of the season. So we were talking about how it's cardinal. So we're looking at a pivot point from the winter months to the spring. So with Aries in particular, we are still seeing a nice amount of dark, but it's not going to be more focused on survival. Sorry, I'm looking at one thing and trying to talk at the same time. Sorry, I'm like reading a text message, which is unprofessional. My bad. Um, so we're looking at the light of spring making its great emergence from the dark of winter. So one way you could look at this is put yourself in this time's energy. Imagine that you've been walking in the dark in a cold environment for months where resources might be scarce, your vision has been a bit impaired because of months of darkness. Then light comes and you emerge from underneath the darkness and you're filled with new life, new energy, new strength. So a big part of Aries is conflict or conflict resolution or having to emerge out of something. And this is where the dark part comes into play because it's about survival. It's about instinct as well, which is what we get when we talk about Mars. Mars is not just aggression for aggression's sake at its best or at its worst. At its best, Mars is serving the purpose to keep life going. That's why we also relate Mars to like penetration or sex. It is a avenue to kind of keep things going as far as like fertility. And we'll get more into this when we talk about like the Mars Venus aspects, like Mars Venus aspects in charts as well. But you can see that it's more about instinct to keep life going. And so there can be this survival aspect of Aries, but it's also a lot of conflict when we're talking about like surpassing some sort of oppressive environment, which is interesting because that's literally what's happening during Aries season. You're coming out of winter, which some would say is extremely hard. We have a lot of depression or seasonal depression or just a lot of time of isolation. But in Aries season, literally everything is waking up. It's kind of survived the cold months, and now it's ready to bring new life into a situation or into the earth, whatever, however you want to think about it, and ready to move forward in a new direction. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm sorry if I kind of made things a bit more confusing by kind of looking at everything from a perspective. If at any point someone is confused, please like put your question into the chat box, so I can re-explain. But so we are going to kind of keep going with the other ways that you kind of can kind of look at Aries as well. I don't know if anybody is also familiar with the story of the ram and the golden fleece. Um, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. It is kind of bringing on the same thing that we were talking about as far as the time of season that Aries season is coming into and the traits that it embodies. Is I think like basically a war was going on, or some sort of like conflict was going on, and this ram was tasked with saving these two children and getting them to safety. And so we see like this hero kind of complex come in uh, from this ram, because I do believe the ram actually like died at the end of the story, which is a bit sad. But we see this almost selfless hero kind of archetype coming up with Aries. And I think anybody that is an Aries would also kind of count themselves as a hero. But, the um, ability to help others by first just kind of thinking of like that instinct or that survival kind of mode comes from Aries. Um, So sorry, I'm trying to just make sure we already talked about Xena, the warrior princess, the god of war. And so now we're just talking about the body rulership. So we've already talked about how Mars as a planet would rule over certain parts of the body. So the actual zodiac signs also rule over parts of the body as well. And they're not all the same. So for Aries, it's going to be the head, the scalp, and the blood, are all parts of the body or pieces of the body that Aries is going to rule over. So then we have Taurus. So where Aries is going to be the spark and the cardinal part of the year, or even just kind of like an archetypal energy, Taurus is going to run with that. And so where we see Aries being that initial light that I was talking about up here in this diagram, Taurus is going to be like, okay, I'm running with this. So basically Taurus is everything. I need a thinner pencil. Is going to be everything from here up until about here, because then we have kind of like a pivot point. I need to, it's going to be, that looks so weird. I probably should have created like a better diagram. Bear with me. But so Taurus is the continuation of that life bringing energy that we see in spring. So this is like typically where we don't just see like buds of flowers coming up. We're seeing like the warm weather, spring showers kind of coming in to play. But it's also a time when the actual light of spring is more prevalent than the dark of spring. There's not a lot of oscillation happening in Taurus season with light and dark energy of that time of year. Whereas in Gemini season, we start to see a bit of not like sorry, I'm like struggling with words today. We're starting to see a little bit of a shift of that balance between the light and dark. So we're looking at Taurus. We have the bull. It's going to be a fixed energy. How do I get off of, there we go. It's going to be a fixed energy. Its element is going to be earth, and the mode, so the mode is fixed, element is earth, and it's going to be feminine. The planet Venus is going to be the ruler of Taurus. And so Taurus season comes at a time where the light that has been initiated in Aries is now gaining momentum and is being sustained. So if you remember in the first lesson, we were talking about how fixed energy is more about sustainment or gaining in whatever came before it. And so with let's take like let's take Aries. Aries is kind of like a tendency towards aggression. We would have to put that more so in like a Venus fixed kind of scope, um, which would mean, let's say, like aggression. Then, if Aries is aggression, then Taurus is going to say, okay, I'm running with that aggression, but I have to include some sort of Venus archetype. So what am I running after? What am I being so aggressive about? This is also going to come into play because we were talking about Mars and Venus. Anytime you're dealing with Mars energy, you're also dealing with Venus energy as well. Because to be pursuing something, you have to also know what you're pursuing. And so Taurus is essentially doing that. It's saying, okay, I want to maybe be ambitious, but why am I being ambitious? Maybe because I need resources, which is very Venus, is something like it's a very Venus concept. And so the Mars aspect of that Taurus is kind of running with is saying, well, I need these resources, so I'm going to take these resources by possibly whatever means necessary, or I'm going to work towards them. But I am very focused on the actual work. Aggressiveness doesn't always have to be negative, but it is like I think like a big focus that we can see. Um, mm, Hannah, your question. So is this info for all the signs available in handouts or change? Yes, it is all in the handouts. Thank you for asking that. Um, and so we're talking about um, what are we going after? So I think a lot of times we can ask like with like the stereotypical view of Taurus can be like, oh, Taurus is like super laid back. It loves to just kind of relax and, be peace, love, and jelly beans or whatever. But I think another side of Taurus that isn't thought about is the fact that it is carrying off it's really running with the energy that Aries creates in the beginning, which is, I guess, like that tendency towards not just aggressiveness, but it can also be turned into greed in Taurus, which is where we find that Taurus can sometimes also exhibit traits of hoarding or greed or, just going to extremes. That is all kind of stemming from Aries or that whatever cardinal energy, because you don't have to think about it just as Aries and Taurus, but you can think about it cardinal versus fixed. Fixed is just running with whatever cardinal gave it in the beginning, and evolving it. So some traits that we see with Taurus are going to be patience, being more stubborn, being more common sense oriented, as well as reliable and pleasure seeking, or pleasure loving. Um, some myths that we can, or characteristics that we can look at with Taurus is ruled by Venus, which we know um, is not just like a relationship planet, but it's also about value. And we talked about this a little bit earlier in this lesson. Um, Venus links to Taurus also through the tarot as well, which is going to be the Empress is like a Venus card, just like we have the Emperor being Aries's card, which we could technically, I guess, also link back to Mars, even though Mars has its own card in the tarot. Um, but it's embodying the same kind of energy. That a lot of, and so we can also see like a lot of heavy agricultural and earthy abundance symbolism like food, comfort, sensuality, which are all Taurus kind of like traits that we can see. So we have a question. Okay, so Honey said, so Taurus is the thinking after you act first in Aries. So Taurus is going to be, so if Aries is action, then Taurus is like more action. um, it's the work that comes behind it. So if Aries says, okay, I want to get a house, Taurus is going to be the actual reasoning behind that, or like the actual work that goes into that. So Aries says, I want a house, and Taurus is like, okay, but what do we need to get that house? I need maybe X amount of dollars. How do I get that? I get that through work, but what do I need to get that work? Maybe I need a resume, blah, blah, blah. I make that, I go to work. Am I making enough money? Maybe I need to make more money. It's more so because it's an earth sign, it's going to be focused on more of the physical aspects of how do I achieve that goal. Does that make sense? Great. Okay. Let's move on to Gemini because I don't want to spend too much time on everything. I guess I should erase this odd looking diagram that I made. Okay, so for the rulership for Taurus, it's going to be the nose, the five senses, and the throat are going to be all parts of the body or body things that Taurus rules over. So where we have the work that comes from Taurus, then we move on to mutable energy, which is going to be Gemini. But Gemini is an air sign, and so it's more about like maybe oscillation of thought or the oscillation of perspective, but it's also ruled by Mercury, which is just going to amplify that. It's also the twin. So we can look at different parts of Gemini energy as being like from Greek mythology, it's like Castor and Pollux. Forgive me, I don't remember the story, like the whole story, but the gist of it, for those of you that don't know, is that there were two twins. Basically, something happened, and one of the twins died. The one that stayed alive basically prayed to the gods to bring his twin back. It was done, but basically neither twin could be alive at the same time. So depending on the rendition of the story, it was either one was asleep or one was dead when the other one was alive. So they never truly met up at the same time. Um, so while one was very much alive, the other was in the underworld, so to speak. And so we can see like this isolation, but this togetherness in opposition that comes in through Gemini. But also we can see opposition in thought too, this kind of disjointed thought too that comes in. That can be negative or positive, to be honest, but it's different perspective. Um, and looking at things from a different perspective as well that we can see in Gemini. So like where we were talking about Taurus, saying like, okay, this is like the very commonsensical way of achieving my goals. Gemini is going to be like, okay, but what are the different possibilities? Because it's Mercury, it's like I need to not only think about the different ways that I could achieve something, I need to try and achieve certain goals. That didn't work. Okay, let's go to the next, the next way that I could look at this or attack this problem from. That didn't work. Okay, let's go to the next one. It's not going to get stuck on one way of doing things or one way of looking at things. It's going to uh trying to like it's going to be like a sampler. I was like, there's like I was going to say it's a trier, but I was like, there's a better word than that. Gemini is like, think of Gemini as sampling things. Actually, I think that's a really good way to think of Mercury in general, because Mercury moves very quickly. And so it doesn't really get stuck on one thing for too long. And we see a lot of that coming through in Gemini. Um, it's also going to be a sign, because it's mutable, that it's going to be very subject to change. So putting Mercury mutable energy together, you get some interesting perspectives in general, but also you get a whole lot of movement, not just like mental movement, but you get a lot of like physical movement too. Gemini rules over the hands. Um, and so you'll see a lot of times when it's either Gemini season, or if you know a Gemini, usually there's always something happening either with their like physically moving, trying to like think things out, or they're talking, um, trying to look at things from a very different perspective. You can also see like when Gemini season, we're about to come into Gemini season. Um, Something that you can see, I think, at its best is usually during a Mercury retrograde. um, and depending on what sign that Mercury retrograde is in, it can amplify it. But you'll see like people maybe being a bit more active as far as maybe like wanting to um, go walking or like taking their cars out. You'll also see an influx of maybe like car accidents as well, which I feel like is more of a Gemini thing because Mercury rules over cars. Um, but it's very short sighted in Gemini because Gemini is an air sign. And so it's not um, going to be as like, it's not going to be super solid as it is like in Virgo, which is an earth sign. And so it's a bit more focused in Virgo than Mercury's energy is a bit more focused in Virgo than it is in Gemini. So you can see like this short-sightedness when it comes to Mercury expressing itself as the ruler of Gemini than you do as seeing Mercury expressing itself as the ruler of Virgo. Very different expression of the two. And this is why you also see a lot of car accidents, because usually when people get into car accidents, there's not a lot of long-term thought there as well. Trying not to get too much on a tangent, but I do really enjoy giving like real life examples of these things. I think it helps like to kind of make things like a bit more relatable and understandable. So if at any time anybody's kind of like, Mikey, you're going on too much of a tangent, please let me know and I'll reroute. But we see some traits such as being witty, youthful, curious. Gemini is very playful. It's a very playful time of year. And we see some of that same kind of energy coming up when we see like as what we've seen in like Aries and Taurus season. Yeah, Taurus season is more about solidifying things. But Gemini is more about like, okay, is there room for improvement by changing things? I think that because we see Gemini as a mutable sign, we get some of the best parts of Taurus and Cancer. Um, Cancer is all about change. Taurus is all about like, I'm going to stay on this one course. And so Gemini is just kind of like the oscillation between the two. And I think this is also where you can see like a lot of Gemini people, or what's happening in Gemini season is, I mean, there can be a lot of confusion about what's going on because you're oscillating between the two seasons of Taurus and Cancer. Change or staying where you're at can come up as well. But it's not as serious because it's literally smack dab in the middle of these two signs that are, I guess, a bit more serious than Gemini is. Taurus is like, I need these things because I need to survive in some sort of instance, or I really value these things. I need to have these resources so that I can be comfortable. And Cancer is like, I need nurturing. I need to grow something, which all sounds very, very serious in Russia, in comparison to Gemini. Gemini is like, I'm free to play. I'm free to wonder and imagine and explore. So it's more curious, youthful. It's more of a multitasker, and it can be a bit fickle because we have it as an air sign, not just because it's a Mercury immutable sign, but also because it's an air sign. Air cannot be contained, and therefore it's also very agile, quick, and it changes direction at a moment's notice. And so, but it can also be inventive because it's an air sign as well, and also Mercury ruled. So I, just for the sake of today's class, and I just kind of want to keep kind of trucking through things, I'm just going to talk about a few of the examples I've listed and just kind of go on my own thoughts with the notes, but just know that all the notes are on the worksheet. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the body rulership of Gemini. So it's the whole arm region of Gemini that's ruled by Gemini. So your shoulders, your biceps, and your forearms and your hands, all Gemini ruled. So if you ever have any issues with those parts of the body, check out if you're having maybe some sort of transit that links to Gemini in your chart. Moving on, we have Cancer, which is another cardinal sign. So we have some sort of pivot happening or change of direction. There's some sort of mood shift happening. Cancer is the crab. It's feminine, it's a water sign, it's cardinal, and it's ruled by the moon. I love, 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 and I wish I could like insert this video into like handouts. I love to talk about, there's this video that I've seen where this crab is like scooping out, he's like on a beach and he's scooping out he's scooping out sand. So he's making like a little hole in the sand, but at the same time, he's like passing the sand that he's scooping from one claw to another and creating like a little dome. And by the end of the video, he's created like this literal like little like dome house thing, which I think is such a Cancer thing. Because it's like home is wherever I am and home is what I make it. I can make my own stability and I can make my own home and my own comforts, but I will always nurture those needs. But also crabs literally carry their home on their back. So it's very domestic. We kind of like, it's very security oriented is Cancer, whether that be literally with home and family or just kind of trying to remember what is home or where is your own security. And that being like just kind of like the main focus of Cancer. Because Cancer is not all just about like home and family. It's also a sign that has a lot to do with money as well as the past, because the moon rules over Cancer. And so Cancer can also be linked with where did you come from? So it's Cancer is going to be a sign that is linked with like patriotism because it's literally like the motherland, but it's also going to be where did your ancestors, where did your family come like from before you? Cancer is going to be not just like about home, like the past of home, but it's also just like the past in general. So reflecting on the past can also be something that you think about when you think about Cancer, because it's about remembrance. We're gonna keep moving. I actually think I went through a lot of these. So we have tough exterior, soft interior when we're talking about Cancer as well. So we can see a lot of feelings, like whether it's like the season and noticing that people are a lot more sensitive, whether it be psychically or emotionally. Happening in the season, you see a lot of that. People being maybe a little bit more grumpy, a bit more reclusive, wanting to be in their shell during Cancer season. Or if you met any Cancer, I feel like you already know, like Cancer is can be that. But I've never seen people that are more concerned about making sure that they always get their shit done, like more than a Cancer, like as far as like just making sure that they always have the money that they need to take care of themselves and other people, more than a Cancer. And that's just kind of like my own thoughts about it, but I'm like, I think like that's such a big part of them astrologically that I've just personally seen. And I think sometimes it's not thought about because they're a water sign. But I will also say that with every change or reasoning that they might have for like wanting some sort of security, it's very much linked to emotion. So what I mean by that is like, okay, I want to like Cancer season says, okay, I want like a home because it makes me feel emotionally safe. Um, and so we still link in a lot of emotion because of that water aspect, but even with like the very non-emotional parts, emotion is still like woven in there either way. Um, and so it's kind of bringing in the intangible with the tangible and creating a nice little like web between the two, um, because Cancer is also extremely spiritual as well. Uh, and so we also see traits of nurturing, being family oriented, empathetic, um, moody, shy, caring, and sensitive. All of those things are mixes between what is real and what is not, which brings me back to remembrance and remembering what is important and what isn't. Because if you think about the moon is our body, but the moon is also a planet that represents things such as like the goddess, in part, I guess, spirituality. Um, and if we go into other like occult practices, the moon represents a whole lot of other things as well. Um, but the moon is in astrology is a lot about change as well. And we were talking about in the first lesson about secondary and primary motion, and the moon is secondary motion and what that represents. So Cancer is embodying that. It's saying, like, for instance, my physical body matters and the health of that matters. However, that is not my soul, and that is, and therefore it's not the most important thing, but I still need to take in like take both into consideration and take care of both. But one cannot exist without the other, or one can exist without the other, but I need to take care of both, and just remembering to balance both of those things is extremely important, for security. We have a question. So how long have we been going? That is a good question. We've been going for about, we'll say, oh wow, we're almost at 2 hours here, Veronica. Um, Thank you for asking that question. I didn't realize how much time had gone by. So let's keep going here. We're gonna move on to Leo. Um, or actually, no, we're not. Body rulership for Cancer is going to be the nipples and the breast. Um, and then we're going to move on to the next handout, which is going to be Leo. So Leo is going to be the lion. It's masculine, fire. Its mode is fixed, and the planet it rules that rules over is going to be the sun. So let's talk about different aspects of that. Good morning. Wow, Australia. I see. Still the morning in Australia. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so we have the sun. The sun is about vitality. It's about energy. It's about rulership, or leadership. Fixed energy is taking on the energy of the sign before it and just kind of running with it. So we see a lot of like focus on family and those that you care about and nurturing. Leo is doing the same thing basically, but it's just really running with that. So it's saying, okay, yeah, I have family, but I need to protect family. But maybe I need to lead family, or I need to. There's like a sense of like responsibility that comes with leadership, that we see quite a bit in Leo, or being like that foundational rock, um, that we see coming through in Cancer, like slightly, but now it's even more emphasized in Leo. It's a fire sign, and so we're looking at exuberance, uh, just a lot of really bright energy. I feel like Leo is probably one of the easier signs to stereotype, but Leo is going to be a sign that isn't just necessarily all about look at me, but I think at its best, the fire in Leo comes through because it's more so saying, I'm burning through what's not real. and focusing on what is and getting down to business on that, because I have a job to do to make sure everybody else is okay and make sure I'm okay at its best. This is not to say every Leo person is like this, or that we even see that come through all the time in Leo, but at its best, that is what Leo kind of represents, is the concern for others and making sure that the things that need to get done, to make sure the group is okay. It all starts kind of like um, at that central point in the middle of everything, making sure the foundation is there. Um, it's a masculine sign. And so it's going to be more active. It's going to really embody the more literal aspects of the sun in general. So the sun is one huge star, which again, I think Leo is one of the biggest, like it has like, it's one of the signs that it's easier to stereotype it because the sun is one big star. And so Leos will often get characterized as like being a diva or whatever. But Leos are also just very energetic, not just because they're a fire sign, but because that fixed energy and that masculine energy are coming together and really creating that persona. Let's see. We talked about the sun being leadership or being kings and queens. So when we get into Leo, Leo is in the summer. And the sign that comes after Leo is going to be Virgo, which is all about preparation. But Leo is kind of like, it's almost at the half point of the year before we get into fall. And so the thing with responsibility, and I'm going to go like, I know I really haven't been running with everything. I'm just trying to make sure that we get through all the signs, like, or as many as possible today. But we were talking about light and dark. So Leo is almost in the middle of the year, that it's in the dead of summer. And so it's saying, okay, basically the time of year that Leo season is coming in is saying like, okay, the dark is coming. The excess of dark, literal dark in the day is coming, which is where we see it happening in Libra season. That's coming. So there's this sense of things are starting to fall apart. And so I have to prepare for that. We see a whole lot more of this when we look into Virgo. But Leo we start to get some kind of like inklings of things starting to fall apart and therefore needing to be that solid structure for others, or that person, or needing some sort of leadership to look to when things are kind of going into chaos. I think you can even see a lot of this through Leo when you look at the opposite sign of Aquarius as well, which represents a group. And Leo is like that leader, or that one person that leads the group. Is the dynamic between Aquarius and Leo. But anyway, I'm getting off subject. But we see some of the inklings of things are falling apart, and Leo is the leader that at its best is considering what are the best options to make sure that preparations are made to, I guess, either make sure things are taken care of, or at the very least, kind of minimize any kind of damages that might happen later on when we do see judgment come in Libra season. So we see traits of responsibility, leadership. We can see arrogance. At its best, Leo can be a benevolent king. At its worst, it can be a tyrant. Can be dramatic, generous, self-centered, warm-hearted, and loyal. So you see a little bit of the whole spectrum when we're talking about this kind of leadership energy, as well as the sun is also creativity as well. So we get that part of Leo, in just kind of like as an archetypal kind of trait that we can see in people or during that time of year. You know, so look at it as lions are kings and queens of the jungle. Think about what the sun does for humanity and its position in the solar system. It literally gives some sort of life sustaining light. You probably would not do well without the sun, because literally we need heat from the sun to survive, which already puts the sun in a very leadership kind of position. Um, the heart is the part of the body that Leo rules over. Um, then we have Virgo. It's going to be a feminine earth sign. It's immutable and it's ruled over by the planet Mercury. So we see mutable energy again. It means that we are taking Leo and then we're taking parts of Libra and we're putting them together to create Virgo. That's all mutable energy is, or mutable signs are, or even mutable seasons. That's all they're doing, is putting the fixed sign before it and the cardinal sign after it, putting them together, and that's how you get the mutable sign. So you're literally taking parts of Leo, parts of Libra, putting them together, you get Virgo. Let's talk about traits first and kind of like implement this way of thinking. So Leo is going to be about responsibility and leadership. Libra, jumping a little bit ahead here, because I don't think we've really talked about this a lot. I've been talking about it, but let's put it into practice. Libra is tactful, integral, charming, can be fake, or like just indecisive. Um, if you put that together with like the leadership aspect of Leo, you get something pretty close to the stereotypes that you hear about Virgo. You get pickiness, you get a bit of anxiety, because of like the indecisiveness that comes around. Like, I know I need to do something, but I'm not sure exactly what needs to be done. But I think it's nice because the earth aspect of Virgo says, okay, I can sit down and like figure out what is the best way to attack a problem or to problem solve. We have a question. Yeah, Hannah, absolutely. Yeah, no, like that is mutable energy. It's just taking, it's like, sandwiching the sign before it and the sign after it together. Let's see. Um, so we could also, and one could say like the preparations just cause a lot of anxiety in general, whether it is like, more common sense oriented or the just trying to figure out what would be the best way to kind of go at things could cause quite a bit of worry, because that's like, I think, one of the um, also defining traits of Virgo is being a bit anxious or a bit more of a worrier, because it's the season that comes right before Libra, which is the season of judgment, the season of balance. Um, Virgo is reliable. We see quite a bit of that in Leo. It's perfectionist, detail oriented, meticulous, critical, and service oriented. All of that we can see through either Libra or Leo. We see a lot of that in Leo in particular, with being maybe more reliable. We see that through the fixed and leadership aspect of Leo, but detail orientedness, as well as meticulous, we could actually see either in Leo or we could see it in Libra, because Libra is ruled by Venus. And so I was very concerned about how do things look, how do they gel together, especially if it's turning it back on itself. Because again, remember that it's Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and so it's going to have a conversation either with somebody else or itself, which means it's also judging its own, judging itself. And so it can be a bit critical of others, or even more so critical of itself as an energy. And so I was actually just talking to a friend of mine not too long ago, and she was jokingly asking what sign has the worst self-esteem. And I was like, well, I think everybody could, probably have bad self-esteem, but I think from what I've seen just working with clients is people with heavy Virgo placement will usually have either a lot of anxiety about a lot of things, or um, struggle with self-esteem because of the kind of tie between Leo and Virgo being the sign between those two. Because you have two signs that are very much like, I have to be strong for other people. and then a sign that's all about judgment in some way, shape, or form. We have quite a few questions, but I'm just gonna look at this really quick. Gotcha. Oh yeah, gotcha. Let's see. Okay, so we kind of went over the traits. So does that make sense to everybody about how we kind of get some of these traits for Virgo between Leo and Libra? I just want to make sure that makes sense. If that makes sense to you, I think that from what I've seen with like different students, that is more helpful than explaining like the tropical like season. Like it makes sense to some people. I do like to explain it that way because it's just different. But I think as long as you understand the modes, this whole thing should make sense. But I just always like to get feedback as far as like the light dark aspects, like looking at the seasons from like what time of year they're occurring into, um, on like what is more helpful as far as like explaining it to you guys, because we could look at it from like a time of year kind of thing, and how the time of year that a season comes up in, and how does that relate back to traits. Or you could just look at it from completely from the mode standpoint, and that should also make sense. But I know that more people have said that the modes make sense more so than the light dark aspect, because light and dark, I guess, to be fair, can be very like not vague, but I think when you're not thinking about it from purely like this is what's happening as far as like a light and dark standpoint, as far as like the sun is out versus it's nighttime, um, then it can get a little confusing, because I know some people are like, oh no, light and dark means something different. I'm literally just talking about like when the sun is out in any given season versus like how early it gets dark. Um, and so I know that sometimes that will confuse people. So yeah, let me know which one you guys prefer. Um, for the sake of today's class, I'll try not to harp too much on the light versus the dark one, but I do find it very interesting personally, just for my own practice, so I just included it. But then we have, oh, this is another one I want to talk about. So Virgo is talked about as being the virgin. And virgin in history, or I guess more in like ancient times, wasn't always about like somebody that was sexually chaste. It was more so about someone that was self-sufficient, or someone that didn't belong to someone else. Someone that was their own person. It was a virgin. Um, Not it didn't have anything to do with sexuality. And so sometimes we get that question about like, why is Virgo the virgin? It's because it's talking about this definition of the virgin, which I think is really interesting when we also do talk about like Virgo and its ties with like asteroids, in particular Vesta. Um, Thank you, honey. I was like, I think the modes are a bit easier to understand too, but I definitely also um, like the seasons one, but I prefer the modes too. Thank you for that feedback. Um, the so yeah, it so like I have a note like towards the end of the Virgo section. It's like it may be of service and gives to others, but it's difficult for the reversal to happen. So a lot of times what you'll see is like there's not like a lot of reciprocity, like with Virgo people, where they'll be very much like giving to others, and they'll be that rock for other people. But when it comes to you doing something for a Virgo person, it can be a bit hard for them to accept. And you see this as well happening in like the actual season as well, um that accepting help can be a big focus of that time of year, because when it's Virgo season happening, it's like right before like all the big holidays start, and things are starting to amp up as far as work quite a bit, and there's this need to really pull together, which I think at its best, Virgo is able to pull together and say, I need help. But because it's an earth sign, there the reciprocity, like if Virgo were like Gemini is really good at saying, I need help and I can be of help. But Virgo is like, I'm giving physical help because it's an earth sign. And so it's about a lot about putting out work, but actually receiving that kind of help might be a bit difficult. Um, I guess at its worst. Not saying it's not possible, but we all have different journeys. So like, but also this kind of goes back to like the virgin thing as well. Being very self-sufficient, or wanting to be very self-sufficient or seeming to be very self-sufficient, but also wanting to be there for other people as well. The intestines and the nervous system are going to be the parts of the body that Virgo rules over. And so if you're Virgo rising, you might be very interested in like your own gut health, or you might be somebody that maybe struggles with those things, or those parts of the body. Libra, the scales, it's masculine. It's going to be actually, let's stop here at Libra. I do want to do a little bit of chart practice. So we'll start at Libra next time. Because there's no way that we're gonna like get through all of the signs. So for like we'll spend like a good 20 minutes going through like you guys' big threes, and we can kind of apply some of the stuff that we talked about today um, through like chart practice. So let's stop sharing this for a moment while I pull up Astro Theme. Actually, Astro Astro Seek is also a really good one that has a really big chart calculating. I can't. I hate that I can't like type and talk all at the same time. It has a really good chart selection. So let's see. We're gonna go to okay. So okay, let's look at everybody's answer. Let me scroll back up in the chat. Uh, okay, Megan. Megan, are you still here? I want to use yours. So I'm assuming, let me know if I'm wrong, that you're a Gemini rising, Libra sun, Taurus moon. Let me know if I'm right or wrong. If Megan's not here, then we'll just move on to someone else. Oh, I didn't even realize. I'm like, I can just look and see if Megan's here. Never mind. Megan is not here. So let's just move on to Danny. So you're a Leo rising. Okay, I think we did your chart last time. Okay, Danny, I am going to maybe come back to your chart since I'm sure we did yours last time. Let's see. Okay, Melvin, if you're still here, Melvin is not still here. Never mind. Everybody left. And we have like a whole new class almost. All right. Honey, I'm gonna do yours. Okay, so you're a Virgo rising, Leo moon, Scorpio sun. How has your year been so far? Because I know the South Node in Scorpio has been, we're about to leave out of, um, let's see. Hold on, sorry, we gotta have some questions. See, Danny, I will come back to your question about being Leo rising. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so yeah, honey, how has your year been so far? Because the South Node is, of course, in Scorpio right now. So I'm just wondering, how has your year been? Because that would mean that right now, let's see. I imagine even with the South Node being in the same sign as your sun, that would still be a lot of maybe like people coming back from the past, or like kind of old habits die hard kind of thing. Um, but it could also be like maybe a situation where you're having to revisit, like go back to certain places, I guess, depending on what house your sun is in. I'm having to do like the math really quick. So if you're what did you say you were? I scrolled down and then I lost your message. Uh,
You're good. Virgo rising, Leo moon, and Scorpio sun.
okay, so Virgo rising, Leo moon, and Scorpio sun. So your moon is in the 12th, and then that puts your sun in the 3rd. So I imagine, because it is a Virgo rising, right? Sorry, I'm like trying to make sure that I have the calculations correct. So if it's a Virgo rising, and then yeah, that puts your sun in the 3rd, and then your moon in the 12th. Um, which that I mean, but on one end, that makes you really, I imagine, really creative, and have a really great ability to kind of transform um, different ideas, or like talk to people, or like kind of like be like a chameleon almost in the way that you think about things. You're able to see things from a lot of different perspectives, even if you yourself have your own way of thinking about things. But you're very
Like,
open to hearing people out. Hmm.
yeah, I like to think so. I'm really good at hearing all different sides and to make it up my own mind. So
Mhm.
yeah, I can also, I for some reason have this bad habit, one of those bad habits that when those habits die hard, of kind of picking up different quirks from different people I talk to. Like I
Mhm.
can talk to someone 3 times for 10 minutes on in a span of 2 weeks, and I will actually pick up on either how they laugh, how they twist their hair when they talk, or different things like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the chameleon is definitely strong.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that like, I don't know if you have your own ideas about why that would be, but I was like, because I don't want to just like spoil it for you if if you wanted to take a whack at it, but because that has a lot to do with your son. So what, I guess, before I like spoil it, did you want to take a whack at why that might be?
Um, the Virgo, right? I did homework from last week, but I didn't do the first house, so I don't know about Virgo.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, this is all tied up, especially like the mirroring is all tied up in your 3rd.
Oh, that I did do.
Mm.
I have a both. I have a both my 3rd house.
Unless you have Mercury in your 3rd also in Scorpio, then it could also have something to do with your first two.
Mercury is in Sagittarius. Would that change?
Say that one more time.
I actually have Mercury and Sagittarius in my third.
So, okay, so looking at if it were like in Placidus, then Sagittarius would also be in your third as well, I'm assuming. And so if you have both the sun and your Mercury in the third, that literally could, because when we think about the third house, it's literally like, embodying, I guess, some very light aspects of Gemini, which Gemini is literally like twins. So you can see like a lot of mirroring happen. And especially like in a sign such as Scorpio that's about transformation, it can literally be like you literally transforming into other people, like almost being like a little bit of a shapeshifter to be to be fair, for however like whatever duration you choose. I'm sure, but um yeah, it can create almost like a literal chameleon, kind of picking up on the small subtleties of other people because it's tied to your sun. And so it's like literally mirroring other people's energy back at them, um, and transforming yourself in that way. So it's like wearing a whole lot of different masks, can come in that way. But I think with Mercury in Sagittarius in the third, because in whole sign it would be in the fourth, it could be um, more of a, okay, I take on maybe different perspectives and I really explore what's the truth of that, and to, kind of feel out like, does this feel right to me? Or does this like gel well with like what is authentically me? And if it doesn't, then I throw it away. But if not, then, you know, or if it does, then I keep it. But it probably comes back into thought, like because you've kind of tried on all these masks at some point in your life, and like those insights that you've kind of like created like a little library of, can be great insights that you use later, since I guess whole sign Mercury would be in the fourth. So it's like reflecting on thoughts or certain small mannerisms that you've picked up maybe from other people and trying on all those different masks. It's just like kind of like picking up little bits of wisdom from other people and really trying to understand the truth of those things and creating like your own schema or your own views based on those little pieces of information that you picked up maybe from other people or from their habits, can come up as well.
That
Uh,
makes a lot of sense. I actually do that a lot. I'm good with new things, with rolling with it, but I
mhm,
prefer having some kind of reference point. So picking up little things from different people to use them at a later date to make a library,
mhm,
that makes a lot of sense.
absolutely. Thank you for volunteering your chart. Okay, so let's see what else. Let's see. Danny, you said you had a question about being a Leo rising. What was your question? Tanya, you have your moon in Capricorn. So your moon in Capricorn is in the first house while we're waiting for Danny to ask her question. Um, so you have moon in the first, whole sign wise. It could be like in the 12th or second, or yeah, 12th or second if you're looking at Placidus, depending on what degree it's in. But whole sign wise, your moon would be in the first house in Capricorn, which honestly, um, it sounds like a whole lot of change to me. But you're also like you're a Scorpio also, and so it's just a lot of transformation, possibly a lot of transformation of relationships. Janet, your message about like your message about are your messages showing up just showed up, but I don't know if I've gotten another one of your messages. Janet. So, what is your sun, moon, rising? Just like for the sake of time today, I'm not going to pull up like a whole chart, but if you give me your sun, moon, and rising, then I can just kind of like point out some things based on what the rising is. I can just do that. Um, but we're gonna do like I think like we probably have time for like two more today. If not, we'll do another like when we do next month's session. We'll do more of these. We're gonna have lots of. We'll also have like a whole class that'll be nothing but chart dissection. As we get closer to the end of the chart, it'll be less of me dissecting charts, more of you guys like looking at each other's charts. And we're gonna play a game called Can You Spot It? So it'll just be kind of like, and I wanted to play that game today, but we didn't get as far as I wanted to in the material. And so um, we'll be basically putting up a chart either like from a celebrity, or if you would like to volunteer your chart to be put up on the screen, I'll have you just put out like some part of your life, some major event or happening of your life, or like a birth chart or whatever. Say like, because I used to play this in my last class, and so like a video, or not like a video, Jesus. So like an example of this would be like if I were to put my chart up, I would say, can you spot where would this quintessential part of my life story be? So, a little fun fact about me is that for like up until I was like in my early 20s, I like it was like a soap opera. Like my biological father was literally hidden from me, and we didn't know that each other existed. That is in my chart. It's in the that aspect of my life was already there because Neptune is on my ascendant, but Neptune is the ruler of my sun, which is in the third. So it's literal like dissolving of communication between the father figure because the father is also the sun. So it's literally the father is hidden. Um, Absolutely. Yeah, no, Tanya, I think like that is psychology and astrology are extremely linked, for sure. I actually majored in psychology because astrology is not a major, which I hope that one day we'll uh, get to a time where astrology is put back into schools because it was taken out during the 1700s. So I'm hoping like one of these decades that they put astrology back into schools. Okay, so let's see. I think we were waiting on Danny. No, sorry, it was got you. Okay, so Danny said your question was about the moon sign in Aquarius. They seem very counter to each other. Mm, 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 mm. So a big part of I'm just gonna go on what I think you're asking is like how would they gel together, having a sun in Virgo, moon in Aquarius, and a Leo rising. I'm assuming that's what you're asking is how would all those gel together. Um, so you said you sent it up there. So let me hold on, let me scroll back. Um, GC, yes. They I think Alex is putting all the replays up on YouTube. So the common thing between all three of those, um, thankfully they don't all like create some sort of like square. Because I think that would probably be a bit more difficult if they created like some sort of like square to each other. Um, and we'll learn about squares, I think, probably next next lesson. So Leo, we were talking about like responsibility. Virgo is preparation. Aquarius is thought for the future. So I think probably like the one big way all of those really gel together is technically always thinking about the future, thinking about where am I going, especially with the moon in Aquarius. It's always moving. I think maybe the difficult part might be if your moon is in Aquarius. Let me just double check what you originally said. Yeah. So moon in Aquarius might constantly be changing how you want it, might be changing like your goals. But sun in Virgo, because it's a mutable sign, it's not going to hate the whole change thing, but it might be like, okay, well, this is a bit nerve wracking because now I had to come up with a completely new plan. And Leo is probably going to be, the Leo rising is probably going to be the biggest component of I don't want to change the plan. The moon in Aquarius is like, yeah, no, it's fine to change the plan. I don't want to, go with like what's traditionally given to me. I want to experience something new. I want to be creative. So Leo and Aquarius do make you very creative. And Virgo is just going to say, okay, but we need to figure out like the intricacies of like how to change the plan. So like for an example, say that you wanted to be an astronaut, like as just kind of like a example. And you get maybe halfway through your astronaut program, and then you're like, you know what, I want to be a supermodel. The Leo rising, one, because it's such a creative thing, gonna love it. It's however, it might say, well, this is a bit chaotic. Also, because the sun is the ruler of your chart, it's all going to revert back to the second house sun in Virgo. And it's going to it's going to ask, what are the financial implications of me changing this? I love the idea and the creativity of this. However, can I afford to change path, like change this path? Do I have enough help to change this path this quickly? Do I need to come up with some sort of list or like, some sort of goal, to-do list, before I, put this into action? Um, it's going to like harp on those kinds of like questions or thoughts. It's not that you won't change if you need to. It's more about like the process of change is like, I think possibly where you can get a bit chaotic in that aspect. Because all three, like that sun, moon, and rising is a really creative, um, and very future oriented and ambitious, uh, kind of trio together. I think it's just about like, yeah, like the small details are where things might get a little muddy, or just a little bit tricky because it's also going to be a lot about like, do I have the help that I need? Because the moon is going to be in the seventh. And so it could also come up as questions of, well, um, do I have the support from other people? Like if I need help from other people to get to where I want to go, like say, like we were talking about like the financial aspects of things or of like, not doing a certain program in the dead middle of it and you want to change paths and you're saying, okay, do I have the financial, abilities to do that? Something that might come up is, you know, well, I could save money to be able to, put money towards, being a fashion model or designer or whatever. But that means that I can't pay for certain other things. I have to make some sort of sacrifices. But maybe it would be easier on you if you had um, friends that were able to be that security or that like secure assistance. But because the moon is in the seventh, it might throw like a little wrench in your plans, possibly because maybe you have friends that are also very artistic and very quirky and future thinkers, but might think about like the how of a situation a bit after the fact and they just kind of go for things. And so they're kind of in the same boat that you are. And then you just kind of like in a situation where, nobody has any structure. That could be a way that, I think at this point I'm just kind of creating a story, but like, um, that could be an example of something that could happen. I could see like with that third house, because remember that the first house is the only house that technically speaks directly to you. The rest of the houses can speak to you, but they also speak to other people in your chart as well, especially with the moon being in the seventh. It puts so much energy from your chart being put on, like, what can I do for other people? Yeah, I want to do my own thing and I want to have my own goals, but I'm also here to not just do my own thing, but I also want to be here to help others and be the support for other people, especially with that sun in the second. It's like even when you need support from other people, you are also going to be the support for other people. But the question is also like, will other people be there for you? Does your chart tell you about all of your partnerships in your life, past and future? It can. It can. Not necessarily just the natal chart, but you can look at different versions of your chart. Let's move on to the last one. Let's see. Mm, let me just scroll up to the next. No problem, Danny. Um, okay, Janet, we will look at yours. So Janet, what's your rising? Because it doesn't, on the screenshot that you sent me, it doesn't say the rising. It says all your other. Is your yeah? What's your rising? Because I don't see the rising in the what you call it. Let's see. Mm, no problem, Janet. Let's see. Let me see if I can make this bigger because I can't see. Okay, so it looks like you're a Capricorn rising. That's what it looks like. So that puts your sun and moon in the 12th. Um, so just scroll back up to. Okay, so if we're putting sun and moon in the 12th. So okay, so this is what I think. Okay, so I said that we were going to put in what we learned today into an example. So this is me doing that because I think I had sidetracked with everything else. All right, so sun and moon in the 12th, Capricorn rising. So that means that Jupiter rules over the 12th, which is going to put a big emphasis because Jupiter is expansion. Wherever Jupiter rules over, whatever house it rules over, is going to be where we put a lot of our energy at. But let's also look at where Saturn is because we're looking through the chart through the lens of Saturn, which already honestly puts a big emphasis on isolation because Saturn is in your fifth in Taurus on a whole sign, from the whole sign perspective. And so Saturn in Taurus could come out a multitude of different ways. It could say either, I really love to spend money and have fun, possibly to my own financial detriment, or I don't spend any money at all and I just kind of hoard everything. Um, and Saturn in the fifth could, because the fifth house is such a fun place, but having Saturn there, especially when it's like your chart ruler, to me, it says that there can be some issues or limitations, possibly with dating, issues or restrictions or limitation with children or fertility. It could be like, I just have to work really hard to have fun. I think at its best, and if it's able to evolve, Saturn in the fifth could be a really nice place. It's because it's able to balance. It is able to work hard and play hard. I guess it really just depends on where you're at in your own journey. But I think at its worst, it's saying like I could hoard everything, or I could be like a bit of a hedonist when it comes to taking risks, or spending money, or just diving into all of the pleasurable things, maybe to escape a reality of the situation. Um, but it could also just say I go a long amount of time, being single, or like I want children, but I'm having issues, conceiving, since it's Taurus, and Taurus can be a lot about like fertility as well. But the fifth house is also about children, but fifth house is also about like love and dating and just having fun. Um, and we're tying that back to sun and moon being in the 12th, and the 12th house is a lot about isolation. It's about mysticism, music, and artistic kind of things. Um, and it's all like kind of really wrapped up in like the more divine aspects of things. So I think on like one end, um, having Jupiter rule over the 12th does give you this very really big interest in exploring different belief systems as far as like the more mystical, or just being very open-minded and wanting to understand the unknown, really wanting to ask those big questions and find like the meaning of the universe, so to speak. Um, it could also make you very quiet, like a very quiet person, or somebody that would rather like um, meet people like through a screen rather than like meet in person. It can be a person that's like a bit. I just learned this, that it's not antisocial; it's asocial when you don't want to like meet up with people in person. Um, but I just learned that I was like using that word wrong. But yeah, no, sun in moon and Mercury actually in Sagittarius could all say like I would rather be by myself with my books and just learning all the things and pondering all on all the big questions of the universe. Or it could say like because like the 12th house is very reflective, and it's like that iceberg diagram that you use in psychology. And so having Sagittarius there, which is already about like belief systems, and a bit of a guru and healer, it could also be somebody that is a really great like almost therapist, either like in an occupational kind of sense, or like a therapist to like their friends or like family. um but there's still like a sense of loneliness, um, that can come along with that. Oh, or that can just be kind of be like a really big part of your life, is just kind of like just going off to do your own thing. And mixed in, because Sagittarius is mutable, can be mixed in with like going out, having fun, but those kinds of like events might be coupled with long periods of isolation and just kind of wanting to, I guess, like just lose yourself in like more mystical or like divine kind of pursuits of really exploring uh, divine wisdom. It would be something I would say with Sun, Moon, Mercury in the 12th. Jupiter, I guess, is another one we could look at. Jupiter is in Scorpio in the 11th. So I guess, yeah, it would be also, again, it would be really um, geared towards goals. What are your dreams? Or what like, so it could be like dreams as far as aspirations, but it can also be like dreams as far as like sleep. Um, and so it could be like dreams as far as sleep as well. And so it could be like, I have some really active, prolific, like, or not prolific, prophetic dreams as well. Um, or like someone that really does well with like meditation, or like, or like shamanic is, I think, what I was getting at. Being able to go into that kind of state to really understand the complexities of the situation, since your sun, moon, and Mercury are all linked to Jupiter in Scorpio in the 11th. which one could say that you don't trust a lot of people. But it could also say that like you're just very insightful because you're really intuitive, and so you know who you should and should not trust. And that could lend to long periods of isolation as well. Maybe not wanting to, go out there with people, um, or like just kind of like go all in with people, or to kind of like, yeah, I think, yeah, that's what I think I'm just like leave it there. But yeah, so that is a class today. We will meet and reconvene here again. Let's say, I think I'll talk to Alex about when our next class will be, but it'll be basically in a month from now. Um, oh, thank you, honey. So there is there homework for this class because we did not get through all of the signs. No, there will be homework in next class though. So just take your time. If you weren't able to do the homework from last class, then finish that. Um, if you would just like to practice basically what we did today, which was like understanding um, and putting together like the how the house rulership, like the planetary house ruler and the house kind of melt together, kind of how I did like in the beginning of class where we had like Jupiter being the ruler of like, or like Mars being the ruler of the 11th, and how I kind of melted that together. Do that. Um, I would not say that we want to go much further than that, only because we haven't finished the rest of the signs yet, and we only got through Virgo. Um, so if you would like any homework today, just to kind of keep yourself going with the momentum, you can do that. You can break down you can pick like any chart, whether it be a celebrity chart, your own chart, a friend's chart, a family member's chart, and make sure that you are looking at their chart and picking out what would be the planetary house rulers of each house, and then picking out the general theme of that house based on the planetary ruler. So if like somebody has Sagittarius in the third, um, Jupiter would be the ruler of their third house. So how does Jupiter being the ruler of the third affect their third house? So third house would be like communication. So if the communication house is ruled by Jupiter, how might that, show up? It could show up as, somebody that is just a really um, great communicator, or it could be just somebody that's just very interested in ideas. But I'm not looking for like, an essay on it. I'm just like, like small kind of like insights like that is what I would be looking for. But yeah, so that is class today. No pressure if you don't do the homework for next week, because basically there will be actual homework once we get done with the zodiac signs. But yeah, I will talk to you guys next time. Thank you everyone for coming. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.